Welcome to this interview. I'm sitting here with Larry Cammarata, is that the right pronunciation?
Yes.
Larry Cammarata, who's a clinical psychologist with 30 years experience in treating couples and
individuals and families.
Yes. Treating everybody basically. And Larry's very much, his life is about healing, and I think we share this in common, that healing is really our focus and where our passions lie. And so in this discussion we're going to talk about healing, and specifically the area of relationships, because obviously the hardest work, possibly the hardest healing work, I don't know if you'd agree with this, has to occur in relationship, because it's very much, we can sit on a mountain and feel like we're at one with the universe, but when we get together with when we're in close proximity to our partner, or our children, and we can't run away, then we really realize we're really faced with the true state of our heart, and we really see how much healing there is to occur, and what we have to let go of, and the pain, the hurt, the desire to control, all these things come up. So you've been married for how many years?
Going on 26 years.
Okay.
My wife and I have been together about 28 years.
Okay, 28 years, wow.
And I would agree that, relationship is really the crucible for a lot of healing. And in some ways it's easy to say or profess we love everyone,
Definitely.
And at the same time, I think it's most challenging to love one individual in a true and honest way.
Yeah.
I think so much healing can come about in the context of a relationship, be that a friendship relationship or a long-term committed relationship where you're willing to take a look at yourself.
Yep. Yeah. Yes. It's interesting. You hear this. What you said, mentioned in spiritual circles, that, well, I love everybody, I love the world. And
yes.
That's such a nice idea.
Exactly.
But I find that life usually pairs us with the person who it's most challenging to love.
Yes.
If that makes sense. That really mirrors the things that have caused us the most pain in our childhood.
Yes.
And it's that person, we're given that person because whether you call it God or life or the universe, that wants to perfect our heart, so that we have a heart free of anger, a heart free of fear and resentment, and so we're given this person. Life brings us together with this person who can most help us achieve that.
And I might also add that even if life hasn't brought that person to us, in some respects, human consciousness attributes to that person certain characteristics that have to do with our vulnerabilities. For example, let's say if you're someone who has issues with low self-esteem, not feeling so good about yourself, not feeling so valued, you might find yourself with someone who's just very precise, who's very accurate, who likes to critique, who likes to analyze, and you may perceive that as criticism, and that may activate that inner child, if you will. And at the same time, of course, that doesn't mean the relationship is not right. It means that there's space created now for healing to occur.
And I guess that's why it's so important that we have the desire to heal, because that opportunity is always afforded to us in every relationship.
Yes.
We can almost choose, do you want to heal or do you want to run away?
Exactly. Human beings have been known to have two major strategies that we inherited from our ancient ancestors on the African savanna in order to survive, and that is control and run away, avoid. In life and death situations, of course, that can be very functional. However, in emotional situations, that can be dysfunctional and render the opportunities for healing quite non-existent.
Of course, because I guess it's scary. Healing can be very scary. for some people.
Absolutely, because it creates, I think, a vulnerability if you're going to be open to another human being to give and receive love.
Yeah.
That's a vulnerability where you're putting yourself on the line to be accepted or rejected. And perhaps we can say that the greatest human vulnerability or fear is that of being unlovable.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think that word vulnerability for me is the crux of a successful relationship. The crux of healing is: are you willing to show the very most vulnerable part of your heart, the child, the scared child, the wounded child, and I feel like, because often we defend that part of ourselves with anger. That's usually when we get close to revealing that part of ourselves, there's a defense mechanism, and it's often anger, and we push people away with anger, and so it's scary to reveal that part of you, the part of you which really just wants to feel safe, part of you which wants to feel loved, part of you which is so afraid of being rejected, and to take the risk to reveal that to another person, and trust that it's going to bear fruit, and trust that you're going to be seen at the very core of who you are, the very most vulnerable, innocent part of you, who I think which is there in every human being, that it's not going to be rejected. It's going to be seen.
True. And I can also say, yes, ideally to be encountered and witnessed by another human being in an accepting way with all of your, let's say, shadows and light can be extraordinarily healing. And at the same time, your own willingness to reveal yourself in a way that holds your own self-acceptance is the healing as well. Yes, it's in relationship, but I would say that regardless of what another individual or how another individual responds to you, your own willingness to be vulnerable, to be open, and to be self-approving is really like being the loving parent that everyone wishes they had.
Yes. Yeah, those words, self-approval, for me they're so important.
There's a movement, if I may say, in the field of psychology around self-compassion. And what we're finding is that self-compassion, that is the willingness to see how we suffer, how we become distressed, with an intention to soothe ourselves, to relieve that stress and suffering, that self-compassion is actually more important than self-esteem. Because self-esteem often is about feeling better because we've done something we think is good or valued,
worthwhile, and
often is comparing oneself to someone else or some ideal position. And that's one level of feeling all right about oneself, and there's nothing wrong with that, and particularly children, of course, need an adequate amount of self-esteem. But I also find that self-compassion is not really predicated on achievement or doing something. It's really about being accepted just by virtue of being a human being.
Like the absence of judgment, because with most people, they're judging themselves constantly, all day long. Everything they do, every decision they make, every word they speak, it's constant judgment. And I guess just the absence of that judgment, when that's not there, then you're freer, because we're our own prison guards. We're our own oppressors to the large extent, almost entirely. Some might argue. We are the ones who are punishing ourselves, criticizing ourselves, torturing ourselves, making our lives a misery. And if you just feel like you have this loving, you look at yourself through loving eyes and forgiving eyes, so you're not always criticizing yourself, and you're as you would a young child. You wouldn't shout and criticize and berate a young child who is making mistakes innocently because they're young. And yet we forget to look at ourselves that way. And I think if we just see the innocence of ourselves, we still have this child inside that wants the same thing as every young child does. It wants to be loved, wants to be approved, and yes, it's a big struggle. I think that many people have.
You're so right.
Yeah.
You know, in doing this kind of healing work, you know, it's important to be gentle and accepting with yourself.
Yeah.
We've probably all, I know I've had the experience where I might have said something to someone or even a group of people, and I walk away feeling like I said the wrong thing.
Yeah.
I could have been more selective in my choice of words, and that could very well blend into self-judgment, self-doubt, criticism, and yet at the same time, those are the kinds of places where healing is possible, in recognizing your humanity.
Yeah.
And how many millions of people, if not more, have felt the same way you felt in being an imperfect human being.
Yes. Would you say you're a perfectionist, Larry?
I would say I have that tendency. Yeah, I don't want to quite identify with the perfectionist label.
Yeah.
He said in a very perfectionistic way.
Absolutely.
But indeed, I have that tendency, and you know, it can serve me when I have to edit something that's written, for example.
Yes.
But at the same time, it can work against me when I'm maybe scrutinizing things that I've done or said.
Yeah.
There's two sides.
Yeah.
Two sides.
Because I relate to that myself, because I know how well something can be done, and I know my capacity, and you know, and I think many people feel this way, that I guess there's this part of us which wants to fulfill our potential. You know, we know we're capable of so much, and so maybe that's related to this this idealism and perfectionism, that we know that we're capable of doing something really, really well. But so often we can never live up to that picture in our head of how things would look perfectly, you know, and how a perfect life would look, how a perfect what a perfect father would look like, a perfect friend. We can never live up to this idea in our head.
Right.
And we're always going to fall short of it if you have this perfectionist tendency.
Right. I think, you know, there's nothing wrong with wanting to perform, let's say, in various roles at a high level.
Yeah.
And yet, that's one thing, without the trappings necessarily of self-judgment. But when I hear the term perfectionism, it's more than wanting to perform at a high level. To me, there are emotional trappings, for example, of being harsh on oneself when you fall short of that ideal. Or perhaps even unconsciously hearing the voice of a critical parent, so to speak, that is judging you for not performing at that high level. So how can we maintain high standards based on our values without self-judgment? When we can identify our values, then we can begin the process of holding ourselves accountable through our thoughts, our speech, and our actions. It's easy to say, I value kindness, but can you truly say that every word you have spoken today has been a kind word? You know, so I'm not saying that so that we should judge ourselves, but rather holding ourselves accountable can be really important, you know, taking us back to the context of a relationship with another individual, a relationship with a family or a group of friends. If we don't hold ourselves accountable, most likely the reflections we receive from people in our relationship circle will, in some form or fashion, if it's a real relationship, hold us accountable, or at least reflect back, you know, where we are out of integrity.
And we'll end up blaming.
It could certainly touch into blaming or anger if, you know, someone is offended or feels judged or feels that they're being lied to. And again, another opportunity for healing if we're not defensive.
I see that that's a very quick path to destroying a relationship. As soon as you start blaming for anything, as soon as you start blaming the other, and of course you take that back to yourself. We do it to ourselves. We blame ourselves for our mistakes. Maybe blame as a, how would you say? What would you call it? Blame as a mode of communicating or seeing a scenario. Blame is we're better off without it. You know, if we can just.
Oh yeah. Blame reduces awareness. You know, the 14th century Persian poet Hafiz said, "Blame keeps the sad game going. It
Right.
keeps stealing all of your wealth,
Yeah.
feeding it to an imbecile with no financial skills. So, dear one, please wake up, wise up." Yeah.
Right. I like that.
So blame will just reduce your own awareness as you focus on another human being. Now, it's fair to say that couples in particular who are distressed chronically are prone to blame.
Right.
And this is a problem
Yeah.
for many couples in great distress.
It's almost like a vicious circle, the blame game, and I've seen it in relationships with friends.
Absolutely.
That it, you know, it feeds us. It feeds our ego. It feeds our sense of power.
Superiority, power.
And I guess it stops us, and it also keeps us in this illusion that we are not responsible. That
Yes.
it's not on our shoulders to change. As soon as they change, as soon as they stop behaving that way, then the relationship can be healed. And
Yes.
yeah, and I guess it comes back to this idea that people are scared of truly healing, of what it really means to truly heal, because of the vulnerability,
Mm-hmm.
and because it means showing themselves to someone who might judge them, someone who might reject them, someone who might hurt them. You know, there's an interesting idea, which is, I guess, I don't know if it's a Christian idea, but this idea of once you've met your loved one, your beloved, and you say your vows and you get married, and that's the one you've chosen, and that I mean, it's so easy to say this is never going to work, or this person isn't meant for me, even though we might have fallen in love, and even though we might have felt like we were destined to be with each other for the rest of our lives, we got it wrong. This isn't meant to be the one. And I think many people they miss out, or I'm not sure I can put this into words very well, but it's an escape route, it's an escape hatch. And in my own relationship, I can talk about that with authority, is that once I know that I've chosen this person for life, then I will always take the choice to heal any difficulties, to resolve any difficulties, and not turn my back and just shrug it off and say, well, this is irreparable. This bridge can't be healed. And what's your perspective on this idea of lifelong monogamy, and whether we should be trying to heal every single difficulty, or know that sometimes the relationship isn't meant to be, or isn't going to work?
Well, first of all, I think we need to underscore some of the extremes. You know, in this conversation, we're not talking about physical abuse, for example, or sexual abuse, or some of these ways of being, of course, that are so destructive and violent that people need to
Escape.
get away to protect literally their lives, not just their emotional lives. So that's one set that we're really not talking about. But beyond that, I make a distinction between falling in love, which often is neurochemically mediated. That is, the brain is filled with these wonderful chemicals, molecules of pleasure, like dopamine, for example.
Oxytocin.
Yeah, oxytocin, and there's nothing wrong with that. That helps us to bond together.
Yeah.
The falling in love phase is one thing, but I like the distinction. I believe I once heard it from the late psychoanalyst Erich Fromm, who wrote a wonderful book called The Art of Loving, probably over 40 years ago.
Okay.
And he talks about standing in love, not falling in love. You know, we might say falling in love is an early phase, the romantic phase. And standing in love, to me, means being in a loving relationship and recognizing that it's not some ideal relationship without any faults or imperfections or places that could afford healing, you know. And to me, that's a more adult relationship and a committed place where you can, like you're talking about, Alex, being willing to work it out instead of walking away when there's conflict. You know, conflict can be very, very difficult to navigate. Many of us were raised in families where healthy conflict management was not modeled, and we often play out the way we've learned how to negotiate conflict in our families.
Absolutely. So in a relationship where there isn't abuse occurring, but there is resentment, bitterness, and criticism, and I guess if your joint focus isn't on healing, you know, if that's not your priority, then that relationship is very much well, not doomed, but it's precarious, you know.
Let me just say something about that sort of relationship, and this is a no blame kind of statement. You know, in that situation, let's say, where one person is being very blaming and critical and just not open to change or looking at themselves, it's very easy to say, if only he or if only she would change, then the relationship will change for the better. And, you know, I used to believe that many years ago, and what I've come to believe is that it does not take two people to change a two-person relationship. It takes one person. And often that person who initiates the change is the person who is in the most pain, because they are the most motivated. And when that one person makes a change, now that doesn't mean the relationship will necessarily survive or thrive, but it also means that if you empower yourself to begin the process of your own change, perhaps inviting your partner into that change process, then that starts a pattern to begin to modify what's been going on.
Yes, I guess the willingness to forgive. You know, if it just, as you said, if one person is willing to forgive, then the back and forth of angry, hurtful comments or whatever, it can't continue. The cycle's broken because one person's choosing not to play that game anymore.
That's right.
And so even if the other, so if one person decides, or one person doesn't want to continue this cycle of punishment and blame, they want to forgive, and that's really in their heart. That's really what they want more than anything else. But the other person wants to continue to blame and continue to punish and continue to point the finger, and I guess that might mean that a relationship two people might have to part ways if one person is not willing to forgive.
Well, I like to focus on what psychologists talk about in the form of boundaries, you know, and say that there's at least two levels of boundaries. You know, boundaries can be physical, as in I'm walking out the door and I'm securing my own apartment, you know. But boundaries often in a relationship that's committed are emotional. They can be physical, of course, but emotional boundaries diminish the reactivity that occurs in this blaming process. And that often is the first step in creating a healthy dynamic, you know, in a couple, let's say, where there is a lot of blaming. For you to be non-reactive to that blaming creates the space, hopefully, for another person to take a look at themselves, or at least for you to seek your own healing with a professional, let's say, or seek help from a friend, however that might play out.
Yes, I guess we give each other permission, don't we, when we engage in this blaming or throwing poisonous insults or comments. Just it can be very subtle comments. When we do it, we give the other permission. We say, okay, this is the rules of this game. I'm going to behave like this. So now, because I've done it, you have permission to do the same. And I guess if one person says, no, I'm not going to allow myself to exhibit this very destructive behavior, and I'm going to raise the bar of my behavior, and I'm not going to engage in this, then the other person has a choice to make. They either become aware of the pettiness of their behavior and their words, or they can lift themselves up and follow suit. Follow the example.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One reframing that has helped me whenever I've encountered, let's say mean-spirited people on my path, is that often those people we might label as mean-spirited are in pain themselves, or they've been wounded in some way, and possibly very deep way.
Yeah.
And when we can remember that, then maybe we can, let go of our own judgment and reactivity, and perhaps even generate some compassion toward them, which at least softens our own heart, and of course may prevent the kind of reactivity that would only worsen the dynamic.
That's right. I guess if we really love somebody, if we truly love the person, even though they may be insulting us or being unkind, I guess it all comes down to how much do we love, because it's very easy to say, well, you don't love me, you're not giving me this, what I need, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
But how much do you love? So if you're in a relationship with this person and they are being insulting, or they are blaming you, or they're angry with you, or they're perpetuating this dysfunctional cycle, how much do you love that person, and are you willing to see them as wounded? Are you willing to see their pain? Because of course they have pain. If they're behaving this way, of course they have pain. So are you willing to look to see through this behavior, which is what our ego reacts to, of course. Our ego just reacts straight away to the behavior. Are you willing to see through that, to stay calm and look through that behavior, and see the person behind it, who is actually hurt, who wants to be secure, who wants to be loved? And I guess if you can do that, if you can cut through that mask and see the person behind it, the injured, wounded child, for example, then your love can be greater, and maybe that's what is most likely to heal that other person. When you really love them, when you genuinely love them, and don't expect anything from them.
Let me also say what comes to my mind. One is the idea that sometimes love has to be a little tough as well, in the form of setting a boundary. I love you, I see your pain, and I'm not going to sit here and be barraged by you right now. So there is that kind of clarity in setting a boundary, and firmness that, of course, needs to happen at times. That's all I want to say about that aspect right now. But I hear you. It's the other part actually that comes to mind. I was thinking about is the ability to take time out for yourself, because what often degrades a conflictual, reactive relationship is adding more gasoline to the fire. And I call it, in the couples I've counseled, taking an adult time out, that is literally saying, I'm here with you, but I need to take time out for your own space to settle down, because once your chemistry is activated, your rational brain goes offline, and you're not likely to get it back probably for at least 20 minutes. What the research suggests is that women, all things being equal, women are more likely to come back to a place of emotional centeredness faster than men can. Faster than men can. And that's why we think that men often feel emotionally flooded, and men tend to shut down more easily than women.
And of course, it's not socially, it's not so acceptable for a man to show their pain, to show that they've got this vulnerability. Most men, a lot of men might not even recognize that there is this wounded child inside their heart. That's not a very masculine thing to admit.
I mean, there are these gender roles and conditionings, of course, that overlay on how we present in relationship, and I don't mean to stereotype any gender or sex here. Certainly in the older generation that was more likely. Things are changing now. I see a lot of younger people really dispensing with the traps of that kind of gendered way of being in a relationship, and I think it's wonderful.
Okay, we can bring the our discussion to a close there, unless there's any other point you want to mention.
That feels right. That feels right.
There's just one more thing I'd just like to say. So for anyone who's watching, maybe we can just say one word for anyone who's watching who's in a, because I know how much pain there can be, how painful and traumatic and upsetting it can be to have disharmony in a household. You know, to be wounded by something someone said, or to feel like you're not being understood, and I always feel it comes down to communication. So, you know, I've had a 21-year relationship with my wife, and I felt things have always been resolved. You know, we've had our challenges and ups and downs, and nearly got divorced 9 years ago. We had the papers, you know, and I found that the secret is really being willing to communicate from the most vulnerable part, and it doesn't always have to be face to face, because I know that in some situations it's impossible to communicate face to face without the volatility arising, and without the blame game starting up again, and without someone misinterpreting what you're saying. And so I found that sometimes even just writing a letter that really comes from your heart, or writing an email and saying, you know, without blaming them, so you have to be very careful you're not blaming that person, but really so they can hear you. I think it's so important to hear each other in a relationship. And of course that may be often what destroys a relationship, that people stop listening to each other. They stop hearing who the other one really is, and they start thinking they know the other person. And of course you really have to listen to a person moment to moment to know who they are. You can't just know who somebody is. It's really in that moment-to-moment communication. So I just wanted to mention that, because I feel like it's a really, really crucial tool, a really crucial way to try and repair damage in a relationship, is to let it be known what's going on to your partner. Communicate with them. Like I say, if you can't do it face to face, by email, by letter, and just, you know, share the vulnerability of your heart, because I believe that when you show your vulnerability, then no one wants to attack a vulnerable person. Do you know what I mean? It's when we see someone who we think is arrogant, or when we see someone who thinks they're right, then our tendency is to want to bring them down and put them in their place, and that's how many arguments can flare up into almost warfare. You know, we think, oh, you think you're so clever, you think you're blah blah blah. We've seen it all before. But when you really show your vulnerability to someone, then that person almost kind of remembers why they fell in love with you, because that's what we see when we fall in love. We want to protect that person. We want to love them. We want to put our arms around them and let them know how special they are.
And what you're talking about too, beyond communication rather, is this process of connection. You know, and that to me is the foundation of this healthy communication you speak about, and also healthy conflict management. You know, the ability to connect with a partner in a supportive, loving way. I call it the 3 C's of relationship, very vital areas. Connection as a foundation, communication, and conflict management. If the connection is faulty, then the communication and conflict management is not likely to be so skillful.
Right. And would you prioritize? Would you say one of those is at the top of the triangle, for example?
Connection.
Yeah. So how would you define connection? Connection
is any turn toward the other individual that says, either verbally or non-verbally, and often it's non-verbally, that I accept you, I'm here with you, and I'm listening to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Larry, it's been a pleasure listening to you. I've enjoyed our connection in this interview.
As I have.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I hope this is useful to people out there, and thanks for watching, and God bless you. Goodbye.
Thank you.